Today, we're diving into a teaching technique that can totally change the energy and the thinking in a classroom. It's called cold call, and its whole purpose is to make sure every single student is engaged, not just the usual few who always have their hands up. Let's get into it.
This is the million-dollar question for any teacher, right? You pose a question and a couple of hands shoot up immediately. But what about everyone else? Who's really with you? Are they thinking it through? Are they lost, or have they just kind of checked out? Figuring that out in real time is one of the toughest parts of the job. So you've got these two very different classroom realities. On one side, you have that classic volunteer classroom. A few eager students are doing the heavy lifting for everyone. But on the other side, you have a high-ratio classroom where every single student looks ready, alert, and engaged. That second one, that's the goal. And cold call is a key to unlocking it.
Now, to really get why cold call is such a game changer, we first have to talk about a concept from educator Doug Lemov called ratio. It's basically a new lens for seeing what's actually happening inside students' heads.
So ratio isn't just about whether kids look busy. It's about two very specific things: how many of them are thinking and how hard they're thinking. And the goal of really great teaching is to push both of those things as high as they can go, all the time.
Let's break that down. Ratio has two parts. First, there's the participation ratio, the P ratio. Think of that as the quantity of students who are thinking. Then you have the think ratio, the T ratio. That's the quality, the rigor of the thinking. See, you need both. High participation on super easy questions doesn't build brains, and a really tough question that only one kid can answer leaves everyone else behind. And that brings us right to the fundamental flaw of only calling on volunteers. It creates a total illusion of understanding. A teacher asks a question, sees 3 hands, calls on one, gets a great answer, and thinks, awesome, they get it, let's move on. But that's based on bad data. It tells you nothing about the other 25 kids in the room. And that's where we can make some big mistakes in our teaching. So what's the fix? How do we get better data and make sure everyone is in the game? Well, the answer is a very specific, very powerful tool: cold call. Now, let's be super clear about what this is. Cold call isn't about randomly pointing at someone to try and catch them out. No way. It's strategic. It's systematic. That key part, without prior notice, that's what creates the universal expectation that everyone needs to be ready. And here's how simple it is to do. First, you ask the question to the whole class, as if you expect them all to answer. Then, and this is absolutely crucial, you wait. You give them silent time to think. Only after that pause do you say a student's name. That little separation between the question and the name is what forces every single brain in the room to get to work. And what this does is it creates this incredible psychological shift in the classroom. When you do it right, it doesn't create a bunch of anxiety. It creates an expectation of preparation. It normalizes the idea that in this class, we all think and we're all ready. And that is a way healthier and more productive place for learning. Okay, but wait, this immediately brings up a huge question, right? What happens if you call on a student and they freeze up, or they just plain don't know the answer? Well, this is where the essential partner technique comes in. You really can't have an effective cold call culture without a strong safety net. Yep, this is the #1 concern, and it's a totally valid one. The goal here is engagement, not embarrassment. So answering this question the right way is the key to making cold call a positive, supportive tool instead of something that feels punishing. And the answer is a brilliant technique called no opt-out. The rule is incredibly simple. If a student can't answer, the conversation doesn't end there. It only ends when that same student says the correct answer, with support from the teacher or even another student. I don't know isn't the end of the road, it's the start of a quick, supportive learning moment. So you can see how this all works together in a beautiful loop. Cold call creates the academic demand. If a student struggles, that's just an assessment. It's great data for the teacher. Then no opt-out kicks in to provide the correction and support, and the whole thing only closes when that original student achieves success. It protects both the learning and the student's dignity. It's just this perfect partnership, right? They're two sides of the same coin. Cold call makes the demand, everyone be ready. And no opt-out provides the promise. And if you're not, we've got you. You will be successful. One really can't work effectively without the other. Okay, so the system sounds solid in theory, but what does the science say? Why is this combo so powerful? Let's dig into the proof.
Well, first off, it's deeply rooted in cognitive science. By making participation a predictable part of class, you actually reduce the kind of anxiety that can jam up a student's working memory. It also forces every student to do what's called retrieval practice, the act of pulling information out of your brain, which is one of the best ways to make memories stick. And over time, it builds metacognition, that crucial skill of thinking about your own thinking.
But here's where it gets even more powerful. The impact goes way beyond just individual learning. Cold call is actually a surprisingly effective tool for creating a more equitable classroom, making sure all voices get heard, not just the loudest or most confident ones.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The data here is pretty stunning. Research shows that in classrooms where teachers don't use cold call very much, you often see a participation gap between boys and girls. But look what happens when it's used frequently. The gap just disappears. Participation becomes much more balanced.
The conclusion is just so clear and so powerful. When you stop relying on volunteers and you switch to a systematic, impartial way of calling on students, you are structurally engineering a more equitable conversation. You level the playing field by design.
All right, so let's pull all this together. We've looked at the problem, the tool, the safety net, and the proof. So what's the bottom line? What is the system really built? It really comes down to 4 huge wins. You get universal accountability. Everyone's expected to be ready. You get true equity and inclusion because all voices are brought into the room. You build a culture where deep, rigorous thinking is just the normal way of doing things. And for the teacher, you get this constant, reliable stream of data on what the whole class is thinking, not just a select few.
And that really leaves us with this final question to chew on. It forces us to rethink what participation even means. Is it just about the performance of raising a hand? Or is it about the silent, invisible, but much more important work of building a culture where every single mind in that room is switched on, engaged, and ready to think?